Chosen one, lock your attention on this message right now. That voice in your head telling you that you were too much, that you were the reason everything fell apart, silence it immediately. The enemy is working overtime today, for one reason and one reason only. The people who called you the problem just realized they were wrong. And that realization is about to change everything. It all shifts this week. The narrative, the blame, the false verdict they placed over your name. But here is what you need to understand. It is not shifting because you fought back. It is shifting because of what you chose not to do. Think back to that moment this week when everything inside you wanted to defend yourself. When you wanted to lay out every piece of evidence, every screenshot, every memory, every version of events that proved you were never who they said you were. But you didn't. You stayed quiet. You walked away. You let them believe what they wanted to believe. You didn't know it then, but that restraint was not weakness. That was the most powerful legal filing you could have made in the court of heaven. That silence was your evidence. That exit was your weapon. You did not find this recording by accident. The algorithm did not bring you here. God did. This is a divine appointment that was written before the foundations of the earth were laid. You are not scrolling. You are arriving. Stay until the very last second of this message, because in the next few minutes, I am going to hand you the verdict that cancels every false label they placed on your life. I am going to walk you through the exact audit of who you actually are versus who they needed you to be so they could maintain control over you. And at the end, we are going to seal this with a declaration that closes the door on their version of your story forever. Do not click away. Your future self is begging you to stay, because if you leave now, you walk out right before the moment everything becomes clear. I know what the last 72 hours have felt like. The atmosphere has not just been tense, it has been disorienting. Like you have been standing in a room where every mirror is slightly tilted and nothing looks the way it should. Maybe you replayed a conversation this week, one from months ago or maybe just a few days back, and for the first time something clicked that had never clicked before. You heard it differently. You saw the dynamic for what it actually was. Or maybe someone came back. Maybe after the silence, after the distance, after everything they reached out, and something in their tone told you that they are starting to see it now, starting to understand that you were not the chaos. You were the resistance to someone else's need for control. You feel something you have not felt in a long time. Not fully peace, not fully vindication, something closer to clarity. But underneath it, there is still this quiet ache, a question you have not been able to shake. And in that ache, the enemy has been whispering a very specific lie. He has been telling you that the reason the relationship broke down, the reason the friendship ended, the reason you were painted as difficult and unstable and too much, is because there is something fundamentally wrong with you. He has been replaying that moment when you raised your voice, that moment when you finally said enough, that moment when you stopped shrinking to make someone else feel large. And he is telling you that was proof. That was the evidence that they were right about you all along. But I need you to hear what the scripture actually says about this moment. Romans 8:33 says, "Who will bring any charge against those whom God has chosen? It is God who justifies." Listen to that. Who will bring a charge against those God has chosen? Not a person, not a narrative, not a group of people who needed a villain to protect their story. God is the justifier, not them. And God has already read your file. God has already examined every moment they used against you. Every time you were labeled too emotional, too sensitive, too difficult, too much, God looked at every single one of those moments and called them something different. He called them evidence of a soul that refused to be erased. You were not the problem. You were the boundary they could not move. You were the mirror they could not manipulate. You were the voice that kept saying something is wrong here, even when they told you nothing was wrong. and that made you dangerous to a dynamic that depended on your silence. The heaviness you feel right now is not shame. It is not proof that they were right. It is the weight of a false verdict being lifted off a life that was never meant to carry it. It is the tension of years of mislabeling finally reaching its expiration date. You think walking away made you the villain of their story. You think your silence in those final moments confirmed their accusations. But let me reframe your entire reality right now. You were never the problem. You were the exit they never expected you to take. And the fact that they see it now is not their gift to you. It is simply the truth arriving on schedule. They tried to reshape you into something they could predict, something neatly contained and easily labeled, something they could manage, like a small, well-behaved garden plot rather than a wild, burgeoning forest, something that would never, under any circumstance, outgrow the meticulously crafted, yet ultimately confining room they built for you. A room with low ceilings and narrow walls, designed for their comfort, not your expansion. And when you refuse to be confined, when that inherent, unyielding core of your being resisted the subtle and not so subtle pressures, not out of mere childish rebellion, not out of stubbornness, but out of something far deeper, something primordial and divine that stirred within your very essence, something they couldn't possibly name or comprehend. They didn't recognize it as a sacred refusal. Instead, they called it a problem. They labeled you difficult, an anomaly that disrupted their carefully constructed order. They declared you to be too much, too intense, too passionate, too visionary, too everything that made you undeniably times you. And the cruelest, most insidious part of this entire ordeal is that, in moments of vulnerability, in the quiet despair of striving for acceptance, you almost believed them. You almost absorbed their verdict as your own truth, letting their fear become the blueprint for your self-perception. But here's what they never ever told you, because they themselves couldn't perceive it. What was uncontrollable in you, what felt untamed and perhaps even unruly to their limited understanding, was never a flaw. It wasn't a defect to be corrected or a deficiency to be remedied. It was a flame. It was the living fire of divine purpose, burning with an intensity and a trajectory that was never meant to be contained within human parameters. And the fundamental truth about fire, whether it's the spark of creation, the inferno of transformation, or the gentle glow of revelation, is this: you cannot tame it. You can attempt to smother it, to diminish its light, to redirect its heat, but you can never truly domesticate its wild, sovereign nature. You can only step back in awe and reverence and watch it burn toward its predestined purpose, blazing a path that only the divine architect could have charted. This inner flame is your divine signature, an unquenchable truth that defies all attempts at human reduction. It is the very essence of your untamable spiritual destiny. Some messages don't just inform, they activate. If something stirred deep in your spirit just now, you may be ready to receive the Chosen One's blueprint. This sacred guide reveals the 8 divine patterns behind your calling, your suffering, and your destiny. It also comes with the full audiobook, so you can absorb it during prayer, rest, or quiet moments with God. And for those called to speak His truth, you'll also receive Activating Your Prophet Mantle, a powerful bonus ebook for those carrying a prophetic assignment. The link is in the first pinned comment, but only for a limited time. Now stay with me, truly lean in, because what's underneath all of this, beneath the layers of misunderstanding and misplaced judgment, is the profound thing most people spend an entire lifetime trying to understand and never quite reach. The people who tried to control you, who attempted to fit your boundless spirit into their small boxes, they weren't, in the vast majority of cases, malicious villains plotting your downfall. Their actions were not born of inherent evil, but of something far more common and tragically human. They were afraid. Fear, in its myriad forms, is the silent, pervasive engine behind every single attempt to reduce a person, to diminish their light, to confine their potential. When someone encounters a spirit, a capacity, a unique design they cannot fully grasp, when they cannot locate you neatly inside the comfortable, predictable categories and paradigms they've painstakingly built for the world, categories that provide them a sense of safety and control, it produces a visceral, almost primal, kind of panic within them. This panic isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet trembling in their spirit, an unspoken alarm bell ringing in their perception. And that panic, in turn, manifests outwardly as pressure, as unspoken expectations for you to conform. It becomes silence, a chilling absence of affirmation. It morphs into whisper campaigns, subtle slanders that erode trust, and quiet exclusions, rooms you were never quite invited back into, conversations you were intentionally left out of. This didn't happen because you failed. It happened because your very presence, your undeniable light, your untamed authenticity, exposed something in them they weren't yet ready or willing to face. Perhaps their own unfulfilled potential, their own unaddressed fears, or the limitations of their own worldview. Your truth became a mirror they couldn't look into for too long. Think about the story of David, long before the crown, long before the triumphs and the renown that echoed through the ages. Before he stood as king, he was simply a shepherd boy, a son his own father, Jesse, seemingly forgot to call when the revered prophet Samuel arrived with a divine mandate. Jesse, in his well-meaning yet humanly limited perception, meticulously lined up every son he considered worthy, every tall, polished, capable, presentable, and conventionally kingly one, an impressive display of strength and stature. And not once, amidst this parade of potential, did he think to mention the youngest boy, the one tending sheep alone in the solitude of the field, the one who spent his days singing psalms of adoration to God in the open air under the vast, dark canopy of night, honing a heart of worship and courage in obscurity. Samuel, guided by human perception, looked at every face in that impressive line, searching for the Lord's anointed, and yet heard nothing from heaven. The divine voice remained silent until the last of Jesse's suitable sons had passed. And it was only when David, called from the dusty pastures, walked through the door, sunburned, unassuming, unexpected, utterly uncategorized by human standards, carrying the scent of sheep and the melody of the wilderness, that God's unmistakable voice broke through the silence. "Rise and anoint him, for this is he." His own family, those closest to him, bound by convention and earthly expectations, didn't see it, but the divine did. The all-seeing, all-knowing opinion of heaven was the only one that truly counted, then and now. And what heaven sees is often precisely what the world overlooks. This, my friend, is precisely where the journey often begins for people like you, for those uniquely marked by the divine. It begins with the misread, the profound oversight by those around you. It starts in that metaphorical room where everyone seemed to have a ready opinion about your limitations, your boundaries, your supposed inadequacies, but utterly lacked the language, the spiritual discernment, or the emotional intelligence to comprehend your true depth, your inner vastness, or the spiritual weight of your destiny. And because you were young, perhaps, or because your spirit was tender and impressionable, or simply because the innate human need to belong, to be seen and accepted, weighed heavily upon you, you began a quiet, unconscious process of editing yourself. You started to make yourself smaller, to dim your light, to soften your edges. You learned, with a heartbreaking proficiency, to walk quietly, almost imperceptibly, through spaces that were never truly built for the full, magnificent, unedited version of you. You adapted, and for a while, In a superficial sense, it worked. You managed to keep the peace, to avoid the painful friction of standing out. You stayed in your perceived lane, striving to conform. But even as you sought external harmony, your internal lane kept shrinking, constricting around your spirit. And deep within you, in that sacred place where your true self resides, something profoundly, irrevocably knew it. A quiet alarm bell rang in your soul, reminding you that you were becoming a diminished version of your intended self. But here is where the narrative goes even deeper, touching a more painful and intricate layer of spiritual truth. The editing, the self-diminishing, wasn't merely an external performance, a facade you presented to the world to navigate difficult spaces. That's what makes this journey so layered, so exquisitely painful to reflect upon, and yet so vitally important to acknowledge and name. Over time, the insidious nature of this process meant that you didn't just learn to hide from others, to camouflage your true self from their scrutiny. You learned, tragically, to hide from yourself. You internalized their judgment, their perceived ceiling for your potential, and insidiously began building the architecture of your entire life beneath that self-imposed, externally reinforced limit. You stopped dreaming in certain expansive directions, silencing the whispers of grander possibilities. You ceased applying for certain opportunities, believing them to be beyond your reach. You stopped walking into rooms, both literal and metaphorical, that were rightfully yours by divine design, because somewhere along the winding, often treacherous path of life, you absorbed the devastating lie that you were fundamentally too much for your own life, too expansive for your own calling, too vibrant for your own destiny. And at this point, the true enemy, the spiritual adversary, the one who seeks to steal, kill, and destroy, didn't have to lift a finger, didn't have to launch a single external attack. The agreement with limitation had already been made within your own heart. The contract of smallness had already been signed by your own hand. You had, tragically, become your own most formidable limitation, a prisoner within a self-constructed cage. What most people fail to realize, often until profound spiritual awakening, is that this internal agreement is the most effective, most insidious, and most destructive strategy the enemy consistently employs. It's not about overt, external attacks that can be easily identified and resisted. It's not about visible opposition that presents a clear target for spiritual warfare. No, the enemy's masterstroke is internal agreement, the subtle whisper, the insidious suggestion that takes root within the fertile soil of our own insecurities and past wounds, eventually blossoming into a conviction that feels like our own thought. Because when the war moves inside, when the battleground becomes the landscape of your own soul, you can't readily point at a specific person who is the problem. You can't identify a clear, singular moment of attack that can be repelled. You simply feel this quiet, persistent, pervasive sense that you are the fundamental problem. That if only you were different, less intense, more amenable, more conforming, things would miraculously be easier, smoother, more harmonious. That if only you were less of who God made you to be, the world would somehow receive you with open arms rather than with caution or critique. And that belief, that quiet, devastating, soul-crushing belief, becomes a prison far more inescapable than any forged from iron bars. It's a prison built of lies, conviction, and self-denial, a cage whose boundaries are defined by your own agreement with limiting narratives. Stay with me, because what's coming next is not just another observation. It is the radical, liberating insight that holds the key to breaking that very prison open, not through brute force, but from the inside out, shattering the illusion of your confinement. The truth, the profound, liberating truth, that heaven has been patiently, eagerly waiting for you to receive and fully embrace, is this: you were never ever designed to be universally receivable by everyone. This is not a consolation prize for your rejections. It is not a gentle balm for your wounds. This is, in its most powerful spiritual sense, a sacred commission. Understand this deeply. There are indeed people who are called to broad audiences, whose message resonates with almost everyone, who walk gentle paths paved with widespread acceptance and open doors that swing wide at their approach. Their purpose is to cast a wide net, to bring many into a general understanding. And then, there are people like you, people who are called to carry something so profoundly specific, so divinely weighty, so inherently counter to the prevailing currents and popular narratives of the age, that their very presence, their authentic expression, will inevitably and consistently produce resistance, discomfort, and even outright rejection in spaces that are simply not their assigned territory. You were never truly rejected from times your purpose, as if you were somehow unworthy or rerouted. No, you were often rejected toward it. Every door that emphatically, perhaps even painfully, closed on you was, in fact, a sovereign, divine redirection, steering you with precision toward your true alignment. Every room that quietly, subtly, or even overtly pushed you out was, in essence, heaven quietly, lovingly, yet firmly pulling you forward, drawing you closer to the spaces where your specific light is not just tolerated, but desperately needed and profoundly celebrated. This is the difference between being a gentle stream and a raging river. Both are water, both are vital, but their paths and their impact are vastly different, and not every landscape can contain both. Consider, for a profound example, the figure of John the Baptist. He didn't emerge from the established temple system, the esteemed religious institutions of his day, or the polished corridors of recognized spiritual authority. He didn't come through their schools or their carefully curated ordination processes. Instead, he burst forth from the raw, untamed, desolate expanse of the wilderness. The very structure that, by all human logic, should have recognized him first. The religious establishment, the gatekeepers of sacred tradition and ritual, simply could not categorize him. His appearance was jarring. He wore rough camel hair, a stark contrast to their fine priestly robes. He ate locusts and wild honey rather than partaking in their ceremonial feasts. He preached not from the ornate pulpits of Jerusalem, but in the open, unyielding desert, to people who had to actively, intentionally, and often arduously walk to find him. And the ones who made that journey, who endured the dust and the heat to seek him out, they were the ones whose hearts were ready, whose spirits were prepared to receive his radical message of repentance and baptism. The ones who stayed comfortably in the city, who critiqued him from a safe distance, dismissing him as a madman or an eccentric, perhaps even mocking his unconventional ways. They were, tragically, the very ones who later demanded his head. What you've experienced, in its deepest spiritual sense, isn't rejection as a personal failing. It's the wilderness doing its profound, often uncomfortable, work within you and around you. It is preparing you, not for universal acceptance, but for the specific, hungry, receptive people who will make the sacred journey to walk to find you, because their souls instinctively recognize the truth you carry. And this leads us to something most people entirely miss, a subtle yet critical connection that often goes unacknowledged. The profound link between divine preparation and the inescapable experience of loneliness. Because the wilderness, for all its formative power, rarely feels like preparation. It doesn't arrive with a clear label, announcing its purpose as a proving ground. No, it feels like profound abandonment. It feels like an echoing silence where there should be the comforting hum of connection, the supportive chorus of community, and an aching absence where there should be reassuring presence, And in that disorienting silence, often amplified by the harsh landscape of your external circumstances, the temptation is immense and almost irresistible. To conclude that God has forgotten you, that your vision was a delusion, that perhaps you utterly misread your own sacred calling. Think of Elijah, the mighty prophet, after his great triumph on Mount Carmel. Even he, after such a display of divine power, sat under a solitary juniper tree, utterly exhausted, despairing, and asked God to take his life. This wasn't because he was faithless. It was because he was profoundly human, profoundly weary, and profoundly alone in his great assignment. And what did God send in response? Not correction, not a stern rebuke for his weariness, not a long sermon about the importance of unwavering trust. No, he sent an angel. He sent bread and water, divine provision for the immediate need. He gently said, "Rise and eat, because the journey is too great for you." Sometimes the most prophetic, most profound thing God speaks into the heart of your wilderness experience isn't a grand vision of the distant future or a booming declaration of what is to come. It is simply provision for the present moment, sustenance for your body, rest for your weary soul, bread for the road ahead. It is the quiet assurance that you are seen, even in your isolation, and that you are sustained, even in your despair. For it is in this stripped-down space that we truly learn to depend not on human affirmation, but on divine sustenance, forging an unshakable bond with the one who called us. What's coming in just a moment will likely challenge you in a way you didn't expect, and it should. This isn't meant to be a comfortable truth, but a catalytic one, because here is precisely where we must go, deeper than mere comfort, deeper than the soothing balm of understanding past wounds. Here is where the message pivots, becoming less about what times did to you, less about the external forces that shaped your path, and more, profoundly more, about what times you've been doing to yourself, times in response to those experiences. This is the mirror that must be faced. You took the painful rejection, the experience of being cast aside, and tragically, unconsciously, turned it into a core component of your identity. You internalized the silence, the void where affirmation should have been, and allowed it to become a self-definition, a quiet pronouncement about who you are and what you're worth. You looked at every door that didn't swing open, every opportunity that slipped away, every relationship that fractured, and instead of seeing it as evidence of your unique specificity, your distinct divine design, you decided it was irrefutable proof of your unworthiness, your inadequacy, your inherent flaw. And so, burdened by these self-assigned conclusions, you've been carrying something that was never, ever yours to carry. You've carried grief over rooms that were never divinely meant to hold the magnitude of your spirit. You've carried mourning over relationships that, in heaven's grand design, were always intended to be transitional, season-specific, serving a temporary purpose before yielding to new alignments. You've spent precious energy, time, and emotional capital striving relentlessly for validation, for affirmation, for acceptance from people whose true assignment in your life was never to affirm you unconditionally, but rather to refine you, to sharpen your edges, to burn away anything that wasn't authentically you, preparing you for a higher calling. This is the costly toll of misunderstanding your own journey. This is the very cycle that must be not just acknowledged, but explicitly named and brought into the light, if it's ever going to be decisively broken. Because you cannot, no matter how much effort you exert, no matter how much discipline you muster, no matter how determined or devoted you become, outwork a wrong identity. You can push harder, strive longer, pray more fervently, engage in endless self-improvement, and still find yourself returning time and again to the same emotional territories, the same patterns of self-doubt and seeking external approval. because the deep root of a foundational, misaligned identity hasn't been touched, hasn't been uprooted. This pattern of seeking approval, of searching for permission from the very ones who couldn't truly see you, who were incapable of grasping your divine essence, is far older and more deeply ingrained than you might consciously realize. It didn't start yesterday. It likely started early in your life, perhaps with an influential figure, a family dynamic, or a significant relational wound. And ever since that formative period, this unresolved pattern has been quietly, subtly, yet powerfully, running beneath the surface of every subsequent relationship, every pivotal decision you've made, every transformative opportunity you almost took, but at the last minute hesitated and didn't. All because some part of you, some deeply programmed aspect of your being, was still unconsciously waiting for permission, for validation, for the green light from someone who was never, ever qualified or authorized by heaven to give it. They were never the source. They were merely instruments in a larger, refining process. But if you're truly honest with yourself, and this, my friend, is where true courage and profound vulnerability intersect, you know exactly who I'm talking about. You recognize the voice, the tone, the subtle inflection that first communicated your too muchness. You remember the face, the expression of discomfort or disapproval that became etched into your memory. You know the specific relationship, the formative interaction that became the unwitting template for how you would approach future connections and perceive your own worth. It was in that crucible, that first painful space, where your natural gifts, your effervescent spirit, your unique expressions were first subtly or overtly treated not as blessings but as inconveniences, as disruptions, as burdens. And everything that has transpired in your life since then has been, in some profound and often unconscious way, an attempt to resolve that original wound, to finally be truly seen, affirmed, and accepted by the kind of person or system who first communicated that you weren't enough or that you were simply too much. This pursuit has been a wellspring of both striving and profound heartache, a seeking of what was never there to give. And yet, there's something even more profound beneath even that layer, something that irrevocably changes the entire frame, transforming the landscape of your understanding. The people you have been relentlessly seeking validation from, the figures whose approval you so desperately craved, were never, ever meant to be your ultimate source. They were never designed by heaven to be the wellspring of your worth, the definers of your identity, or the certifiers of your calling. And the very moment, the precise spiritual instant, that you consciously and decisively transfer your deep-seated need for approval, for affirmation, for permission from them, from mere mortals whose vision is limited and whose love is often conditional, to the one who lovingly formed you in your mother's womb, the one who knitted you together with divine intention, the one who inscribed your purpose upon your heart before the foundations of the earth were laid. In that moment, everything shifts. Not gradually, not symbolically, but fundamentally, irrevocably. Because when you finally stop auditing your intrinsic worth, your boundless capacity, your divine fire through the clouded, often fearful eyes of people who were intimidated by your flame, you suddenly gain access to a profound clarity, an unshakable certainty, a divine perspective that fear and human judgment could never, ever give you. You begin to see your entire history, every twist and turn, every closed door, and every perceived rejection through a new lens. It no longer appears as a fragmented series of failures, disappointments, and rejections. Instead, it reveals itself as a sacred corridor, a long, sometimes dark, often lonely corridor that was always leading somewhere specific, somewhere purposeful. And you, my friend, are standing at the very end of it now, Not broken beyond repair, not defeated, not finally shrunk down to a size that offers superficial comfort to others, but finally, gloriously, authentically free enough for the full, unbridled manifestation of your divine purpose. This corridor was not an abandonment, but a guided path. Here's the part, the radical truth you probably didn't expect, the one that truly shakes the foundations of old beliefs. The thing that has been consistently, insidiously blocking you from stepping into your full destiny isn't solely the people who rejected you. It isn't the external enemy, though that force certainly exists. It isn't even the trauma itself, as real, as deep, and as profoundly impactful as it has been in shaping your journey. No, the most potent, most persistent thing that has been blocking your full, powerful emergence is your time's loyalty. Times to the version of yourself that was carefully, meticulously shaped and defined by all of it, by the rejections, by the misreads, by the trauma, by the whispers of inadequacy. You've been loyal to your smallness. This isn't because you inherently love being small or because a diminished life is your deepest desire. Rather, it's because small, in its deceptive way, feels safe. It feels contained, predictable, less threatening. You developed this loyalty because big, expansive, authentic expressions of your true self have always come with attack, with critique, with the discomfort of standing out. Every time something vibrant, powerful, and truly authentic within you has risen, something around you, either externally or internally, has pushed back, has attempted to clip your wings or dim your light. And so, somewhere deep within your survival wisdom, within the subconscious calculations of self-preservation, you made a pivotal decision. The safest, most protected way to exist was to remain perpetually unfinished. To stay in a continuous state of becoming, always on the cusp of breakthrough, but never quite fully arriving. To stand forever at the perceived edge of your destiny, gazing out at the promised land, and label it wisdom, call it waiting patiently on God, or even spiritual discernment, when, in its rawest, most honest form, it has been fear wearing an exquisitely tailored spiritual costume, masquerading as prudence. This fear, disguised as virtue, has kept you from taking the final, necessary leap. Understand this with absolute clarity. Heaven is not impressed by your continued preparation, if that preparation has become an excuse for delaying your arrival. Heaven is not waiting for you to perfect every single detail or gain universal human approval. Heaven is waiting for your time's arrival. It is waiting for you to step fully into the sacred space you were always destined to occupy, to embody the calling you were created for, to unleash the flame you were meant to carry. And this, truly, is the final transformative shift, the one that powerfully reframes everything that has come before it, changing the very narrative of your spiritual journey. You have not, in the deepest sense, been waiting on God to align circumstances, to open doors, to give you a clearer sign. No, God, in his infinite patience and unwavering love, has been waiting on time's you, waiting for you to finally put down the apology for your very existence, to shed the burden of feeling like an inconvenience, waiting for you to stop shrinking your magnificent spirit, your boundless gifts, your vibrant truth, solely so others can feel more comfortable in their limited perceptions, waiting for you to stop perpetually asking for permission, for validation, for a blessing from people who never, in the first place, had the divine authority or the spiritual qualification to grant it. The season you've been praying for, the breakthrough you've been yearning for, the full manifestation of your purpose. It doesn't begin when every external circumstance perfectly aligns. It doesn't begin when every door is visibly open and every critic is silenced. It begins when you decide, truly, unequivocally, with every fiber of your being, that who God says you are, what God has declared over your life, is more real, more true, more potent, and more authoritative than any fear, any lie, any judgment, or any limiting narrative that has ever been whispered to you or by you. You were never, not for a single moment, the problem. You were always, in your essence, the answer, the solution, the divine breakthrough they weren't ready for, couldn't categorize, and perhaps even resisted. And now, the season of waiting for times to get ready, for times to catch up, for times to understand, is over. It's time for you to claim your space, fueled by divine truth, unburdened by past agreements. Place your hand on your heart and declare this with me, not as a mere recitation, but as a deep, resonant declaration of truth that shakes the foundations of every past limitation. I release every label, every judgment, every limiting expectation that was ever placed on me by people who couldn't hold, couldn't comprehend, and couldn't contain the magnitude of my divine purpose. I release every agreement, conscious or unconscious, I made with smallness, with invisibility, with self-diminishment, in order to survive spaces that were never, by divine design, mine to stay in. I break every cycle of seeking permission, of craving validation, of searching for approval from those who were never, and could never be, my true spiritual source. I receive the fullness of what God has deposited within me, not when I feel I've perfectly earned it, not when I have every single step perfectly figured out, not when everyone around me finally understands or applauds me, but now, today. In this sacred, sovereign moment, I step out of the corridor of preparation, out of the echoes of past limitations, and boldly, authentically, into the vibrant, expansive reality of my calling. I am not too much. I am, by divine decree, exactly enough for everything heaven has assigned to my hands, to my voice, to my spirit. I am seen by the one who matters most. I am chosen for this specific time and this specific purpose. I am ready. And I will no longer delay what God has already declared, commissioned, and empowered within me. If this message reached something in you that needed to be reached, don't let it end here. Share it with someone who has been told they're the problem when they never were. Leave a comment and tell me what broke open for you. And if you're ready to go deeper into your calling, your identity, and the divine blueprint behind your journey, the link in the first pinned comment is waiting for you. But don't sleep on it. Some doors are only open for a season.